Now we're going to begin tonight a 7-week study of love. I would like at this time to outline step by step all of the areas that we're going to cover in the next 7 weeks, but unfortunately I can't because I don't know. I've simply decided that we'll kind of let the thing unfold by and large, and maybe from week to week we'll have somewhat of an idea where we've been, and when we're through we'll know where we've been, or hopefully. Some people would say, how can you deal to that great extent with something like love? Either love happens to you or it doesn't. And right off then, we're in trouble because this is a total confusion of what love is. Actually, love is a relatively rare phenomenon in our society. Now, that's a startling thing for me to say, and I hope that I can back it up. I don't know. But love is a relatively rare phenomenon in our society. We talk about love a lot. An awful lot of people assure other people that they love them. We have an awful lot of love stories written, and love is the theme of a great deal of music, some of it good, some of it not so good. There are many relationships and many emotions that are referred to as demonstrating love. But basically, love has become, as at least one very fine dramatist has put it, a repository for hypocrisy and insincerity. Certainly there's no word in the language that is used with more meanings than the word love. And many of the meanings are, to a certain degree, less than honest because they tend to cover up the true feelings. And a good example, we'll use Shakespeare as our authority, first of all. I don't know how much Shakespeare knew about love, but certainly he has written some pretty interesting things on the subject. And I love especially his 116th sonnet, which is totally about love, in which he says, among some other things, that love is not love which alters when it alteration finds. Now he's saying here that if you think you love someone or think you're expressing love, and then when that person lets you down or suddenly becomes unlovable, that you stop loving him, or if your love alters or you suddenly become bitter and unhappy, or if you say, I loved him with all my heart, but after what he did to me, I hate him with a passion, then, according to Shakespeare, you never really loved in the first place. This was simply a cover for your dishonesty, that you were not loving him, you were investing something of yourself in him, hoping to get something back, you see, which is not love. This is why we say love is a relatively rare phenomenon in our society. And I said, that's a rather horrible thing to say, to start out a series on love. There are an awful lot of cliches about love. Love is the greatest thing in the world. Love makes the world go round. What the world needs is love, the song sings. Love will solve all problems. And there are many people around who will say, well, dear, all you've got to do is express divine love and everything will be all right. And again, what does this mean? As Lewis Mumford says, as with peace, those who call for love the loudest often express it the least. He says, to make ourselves capable of loving and ready to receive love is the paramount problem. He says, the paramount problem of integration and the key to salvation. It's easy to mouth the words, love is the answer to everything. All we got to do is love and everything works out, you see. But unless we understand what love is and how it works, to talk about love as the answer, or to tell people, just love him, dear, and everything will work out, can actually promote hypocrisy and sham. Because to just tell him you love him is to try to convince him that you have a feeling for him which maybe you don't even have, which you wish you had, which you're trying to have, and you feel bad because you don't, so you tell him. The thing is, if I tell you that I don't like you one little bit, You may be hurt by that. But there's one thing about it. You'll have to say, at least I'm honest. Now, you may say, if you're a very loving person, well, he really doesn't dislike me that much. And that may or may not be true. But the point is, at least you have a feeling that I'm expressing what I really feel. But if I tell you I love you, dear, you can be, and maybe you should be, a little bit suspicious. Because I may be covering up an awful lot. I may be saying, I think it's a nice thing for me to be loving to you. I should be loving. After all, in my position, I ought to be loving to everybody. Love is a great thing, and therefore, if we relate in love, this is going to solve all of our problems, so I'm going to start the ball rolling by saying that I love you. But then, if I say I love you, actually, you're going to begin to question, probably, unless you're a sucker for flattery, you're going to begin to question, well, what right does he have to love me, or how do I know he loves me, or what is love anyway? What does he mean by love? You know, we have a lot of things. You know, if a girl happens to be a very pretty girl and I say, I love you, she may pull back. Say, well, you know, the man's making a pass at me. Or if I tell a man I love you, he'll say, well, you know, what is this man? Isn't he all man, you know? And so what do we mean by love? What is love? I think that it's rather interesting that so often we tend to cover over a lot of confusion, a lot of feelings of inadequacy, a lot of frustrations by simply glossing over the idea of love. It's like faith. Faith is another attribute that is so often overworked. People get very confused about this matter of faith. They say, I don't understand it. You know, you tell me all you got to do is have faith in God, and I have faith in God, and my problems didn't work out. We seem to think that having faith means saying you have faith. In the same way, we seem to think that loving is just saying you love. But obviously, there's a lot more than that. And the reason, for instance, in faith that a problem doesn't work out because I have faith in God or said I have faith in God is because what I'm really implying by my statement is I believe that faith is a very important facet or factor of consciousness. I believe that faith should be able to do great things for me, and so I believe in faith. I believe in believing. And I believe that if I say that I have faith in God, that somehow something is going to happen. But as the man said to Jesus, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. He was honest, you see. He was saying, I believe in believing, but I don't know how to believe. And this is the dilemma that we're in with loving. Love is a great thing. Love is the greatest thing in the world. There's no question about it. I'm not putting it down. But what is love, and how do you love? I can say all you got to do is love, but then all right, fine, now tell me how to love. Tell me what love is. Tell me what to feel, what to say, what to do, what button to touch. You know, and things will begin to change. I remember a special workshop that I saw some time ago. It was on Channel 13 on television. It was a workshop, one of these marathon sessions that went on for hours and hours and hours. I think it went on for several days, actually, when a group of 10 or 12 or 14 people of all different political persuasions and all backgrounds, and there were men and women, young and old. There were black people, there were white people, there were all the various spectrum, conservatives and radicals and liberals and so forth. And their basic confrontation was on race, and they were trying to get some sort of a feeling of what this racial thing is about and how we can solve the problem. And they went on and they talked and they argued and they had all sorts of experiences. And in the end, when they were summing it all up, I thought it was rather interesting that the two people that seemed to get a closeness during this time and develop a mutual respect were the two extremes. One fellow was a white Southern bigot. And boy, I just can't stand those niggers, you know. And the other fellow was a black militant. And they were holding hands at the end. And the reason was, they said, we have discovered that we are the only ones that we can trust in this group, because we know where we stand. Everybody else was on the various spectrum between, you know, well, after all, we love everybody and we understand. I don't have any prejudice. I don't have any feelings and so forth, you know. These people have discovered that they could trust one another, so they developed a respect for one another after a couple of hours, a couple of days together in this tank, as it were, of confrontation, which is kind of interesting. I don't know what it says, except that sometimes the idea of love, as the writer said, is a, how did he put it, a repository for insincerity. This is interesting. And I want to start out by challenging in this way, because we really want to challenge our feelings about love and what love is and what we feel about it. One of the problems of learning to love, to know and experience the power of love, is what Erich Fromm refers to as marketplace orientation. And what he means by that is that we are involved in a culture where everything is put on the basis of buying and selling, and how much is it going to cost, and what does it get you, and so forth. And I was joking yesterday, and I hope everybody assumes I'm joking, but I'm sure from a Freudian point of view I was expressing some inner feeling. And we were talking about Valentine's Day, and I said that it was I Love Hallmark Day. In other words, love is so often put in the balance of things. And on Valentine's Day, of course, the emphasis is put on sending a Valentine's card, which means going to the master creator, Hallmark, and getting the finest cards and so forth, if you care enough to send the very best, you see. We tend to put this kind of a sense of values on what we call love. In other words, when was the last time you heard, well, if he loved me, he would buy that fur coat for me? Or at least give me a Valentine card. He didn't love me very much, or he would have sent a card, you see. Or of another person, he must love her a great deal to do so much for her. Or in another case, he doesn't love her very much, or he would do more. So we have these emphases of the material value that gets all cut up in this matter of love. And then we go to another extreme, and we see parents expecting their children to love them as a repayment for the sacrifices that the parents made. And how often a mother will say to a child, you know, after all I've done for you, you owe me an awful lot of love. And so the idea of love is put on a sort of materialistic basis, you see. And quite often, this is the only exposure to love that young people have when they're growing up. You look back in your own background, and you'll probably see a good bit of this too. If you had any love at all, it was quite often on this basis. And of course, you see, if I'm told that I owe you a lot of love for what you've done, and if I'm any kind of a person who accepts any sort of obligation, then of course I'm going to fulfill this obligation and give you this love I owe you. But what it's going to be is a kind of a love which is saying, I love you. You know, I'll say, well, after all, I owe the old gal some love, so I guess I better love her. So I tell her, I love you, dear. You know, you're a wonderful mother. I love you. And I have simply covered up my insincerity. You see, because if I really felt that, I wouldn't feel a sense of obligation. I wouldn't be involved in the question of whether I should love her or whether I should tell her I love her, or it's like I've always kidded about the idea of Mother's Day. I joke about it, but I'm very serious about it. I have a thing about all these days, Brotherhood Week and Mother's Day and Father's Day and Be Kind to Your Neighbor Day and all this sort of thing, because this gives us a beautiful opportunity, you see, to cop out. You know, I can send my mother a big basket of flowers on Mother's Day, you know, and the flowers say, I love you, dear, you're the most wonderful mother in the world, and then I spend 364 or 5 days acting as if she doesn't exist. You know, I've always said it might be much better to have a Hate Your Neighbor Day or a Hate Your Mother Day. Take this one day where you tell her all the horrible things you can think of and then spend the rest of the time being nice, at least, you know, and then there's some kind of sincerity involved in it. But the point is we will tend to substitute material values to kind of say the things that we think ought to be said and assume that means love. And then because so many of us haven't really had an experience of love, then we're overwhelmed by this thing. He sent me a card, so he must love me, you see. Now again, don't tell Hallmark that I'm knocking down the card business. But the point is, these things may not actually reveal love. As much as anything else, they may reveal the absence of love and the feeling of guilt because of the absence of love. And this may well be a love that is a house built on sand, which can so easily collapse. As William Butler Yeats, the Irish poet-dramatist, says, we lose our freedom more and more as we get away from ourselves because we have turned the table of value upside down. And we believe that the root of reality is not in the center, but somewhere in the whirling circumference. You see, the thing that is so important, I believe, that we must know about ourselves is that because of the culture in which we live, which is pretty much out of the Western stream, that has been greatly influenced by the Industrial Revolution, we have a tremendous exterior orientation in life. This is profound in America. It's true in Europe, in all the Western culture. And that is, we tend to be almost entirely oriented exteriorly in everything we do. We think only in terms of getting ahead, making more money, getting a bigger car, being able to have the bigger diamond, and whatever the job we have or whatever we do, the education is all put on the basis of if you go to school, stay in school longer, you can make more money that will take you to the top and all that sort of. Who wants to be a failure? There's nothing wrong with these things. But it's important that we see this kind of exterior orientation because it carries over into every area of life. And it is in part, if not totally, the problem that we have in this thing called love. Because it too is put on the basis of the exterior orientation. Because then it becomes a matter of love as an object. It's still somebody out here. Love means this person, that person, or the other person, or looking for the person out here, rather than thinking of it in terms of a state of consciousness or an energy force that flows from within ourselves. We tend to think, well, love is a simple matter. I mean, anybody can love if you have somebody to love. When the right person comes along, then I will love, And that's as simple as that, we say. But that's put it all on the basis out here. We have completely ignored the readiness for love, the consciousness of love, the preparation for love, which has a great deal to do with what we are, and very little to do with what other people are. In other words, as we said last Sunday, love is not so much finding the right person as much as it is becoming the right person. It has everything to do with the development of ourselves. But you see, life for most of us, and I suppose we should say for all of us, is a continuous quest for love. And because of this exterior orientation of life, it becomes a quest for love out here. And so many, many folks, all through their lives, harbor this sort of secret romantic feeling of finding love somewhere, And of course the advertisers love this. They advertise a cruise and they show people meeting and holding hand in hand, and walking off into the sunlight and so forth. And so there's this great appeal. This is where you will find it. This is where you will find it. You will find love here. You will find love there. This constant quest for love. The point is, everybody has this urge, this desire to find love. It's basic to life. And it probably is true that the most sordid and the most depraved and the most confused lives, no matter what they're doing or saying, no matter how vicious it may appear, they're really crying out to society saying, won't somebody please love me? The most hardened criminal is saying this. Won't somebody please love me? But you see, living at the circumference of life, we tend to spend our whole lives running, escaping, having no idea what we're escaping from or what we're escaping to, somehow motivated by the feeling that maybe there I will find it. Maybe there I will find it, looking for love. And yet, there's no possibility we can find love in this way. Because love is not out here. Love is something that emanates from the very depth of our own self. But we spend money and time and effort constantly seeking out ways of trying to get away from the present experiences into other experiences which we assume are going to change it all. And as a matter of fact, we may not particularly agree with this, we may not think it's very kind, but many of us get into a pattern, for instance, of running away from the city in the hot summer and going to a cooler climate and going to Florida in the winter to get away from the climate and so forth, and getting out of this kind of boredom into more activity. And we can justify these things. Why shouldn't I do it? I have the money. Why shouldn't I do it? Because it's there and so forth. But the question is, why do we do these things? Basically, we do this and have this kind of a pattern in our life because we can't really sit down and accept ourselves. Because we haven't really found the only person that can love us. which is us. The only way we can ever be loved is to love ourselves. The thing is, if you try to talk to the chronic escapist, and there are a lot of them around that run from here to there and everywhere, ever on the move, running from themselves, if you try to help him to get a deeper insight into truth, to see himself and to say, look, settle down for a while and be still and get to know yourself and find this depth within yourself, he'll say, come on, you're a complete idealist. You're trying to escape from the reality of life. He's talking about escaping, and he's running all the time, you see. But he calls you an escapist. And the paradox is, of course, that the person who has found the answer to life, who has found himself and has a feeling of mature self-love, has done so not by escaping from reality, but by escaping to reality, to the only reality there is, that which is that within. In other words, he's come to know himself as a love activity. He's found himself to be created in the image and likeness of love, and so he feels secure in a love which is constant. Now, some will say, well, that's about what we might have expected from a preacher. We decide to talk about love, and first thing he's talking about God. It's like the story of the little boy who had a next-door neighbor who was a minister, and the boy's out on the sidewalk this day, and he's trying to fix his wagon. He's having a hard time, and the minister comes by, or the father, I'm all confused. I'll start over again. The little boy's father was a minister. And anyway, the man next door came by, and so he asked the next door neighbor if he would help him fix his wagon. And so the man was very generous with his time, and he got down on his knees, and he worked and got the thing all put together finally. And then he says, hey, why don't you ask your dad to do this? And the youngster said, no use. He don't know nothing except about God. Took me a while, but I got the story out. But anyway, the point is, the minister should be talking about God, supposedly. And so even if you start to talk about love, you're going to talk about God. But the point is, to talk about love and leave out the deeper dimension of life, or leave out the transcendence of life, or the creative process, or the infinite source of all, or God, if you will, is about as foolish as to talk about making hay while the sun shines and leave out the sun. It makes about as much sense, you see, because God is what love is all about. And love is what God is all about. And if we try to separate them, then we're only going to have confusion. And that is why I said in the beginning that love is a phenomenon that doesn't happen very often. Because it's very, very rare that people really relate the two together. And that's the challenge of this particular series that we're going to talk about. Many people who say there is no God still speak and write of love, and obviously many of them also make the choice to love and to accept love in their lives. Because without God there's no love, and without love a man is simply hiding from God. He's hiding from the depth of himself, you see. I'm not talking about God up in the skies. I'm talking about God as the spiritual reality of things, the inward potential. And the great fall of man, which the Scriptures talk about, is a fall of the person from the sense of innateness. And that's the problem with all of us. We've tended to fall away from the realization that the only reality of life is the innateness of life. Everything else is commentary on it. Everything else is acting it out. But the only reality of you is the innateness of you, the depth of you, the spiritual core of you. And so love that is not based upon and expressive of this depth is not love. It's insincerity. It's talking about love. It's protesting love. It's saying, but you know I love you, even if I mistreat you, you know. It's using the word love to cover over a lot of things which are emotional, which are sexual, which are based on all sorts of confusing things, but which are not basically related to the innateness, which is what love really is. Man basically is a spiritual being. He's a creature of God, a son of God. He is a transcendent creature. He is an idea, an infinite idea in the process of expressing, just as a rose is a seed that is blossoming forth and constantly coming forth into this beauty which it has innate within it. Man has this seed potential within him. This is where his creativity is. This is his potential. It's not something that you're going to get out of reading a book, how to win friends and influence people, you see. And that's not knocking the book. It's a good book. But the point is, the only way in which we can really better ourselves is to know ourselves, to know the withinness of ourselves. The only way we can love is to find the withinness of love and let love blossom forth from the inside out, you see. So the true purpose of life is to unfold and to express on the outside that which is our innate potential, the seed which we are, which Paul refers to as Christ in you, the hope of glory. And the word Christ, of course, turns a lot of people off because they say, well, that's a religious thing about Jesus and so forth. But the Christ doesn't refer to Jesus. Christ refers to the depth. Jesus discovered that depth in himself. And that's what Paul refers to as Christ in you, not Christ in Jesus, and not Jesus Christ in you, but Christ, the depth in you that Jesus discovered as a depth in himself, you see. So it is this depth within you, this deeper innateness of you, which is the key to loving. And without relating love to that depth, your love is not real. It's insincere. It's imperfect. Now, you read a lot of how-to books. Most of them are metaphysical, and or at least metaphysically inspired. And there is constantly the impression given that people rarely want to be whole people. In other words, what is being said over and over is that what a woman wants is not to be a whole person, but she wants to be glamorous and desired. And what a man wants is not to be a whole person, but to be successful and powerful. Now, what's wrong with that? We say, well, there's nothing wrong with it. But we want to face it. We want to face it that these are things that deal pretty much with the circumference of life. And unless they're built upon the solid rock of an innate awareness, then we're building a house on sand. That's why the scriptures say, except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it. And there's a great deal of attempt in this kind of how-to philosophy to build a life that is not really built upon the rock of our innateness, upon what we are. So in a sense, we are building something that we referred to a few weeks ago as a paste-on image that we sort of paste over, and inside is something entirely different. And that creates a lot of conflicts. In other words, we're constantly told that what we really want, and because of the tremendous influence of this type of advertising and this type of publicity, we say, well, if that's what we want, then I guess that's what I should want. What we want is to glide in gold-plated automobiles along superhighways towards smarter and smarter places. That's what we want, don't we? Say the advertisers. And we say, yes, we do. Who wants to be left out? You know, I want to be there too. I want to be in it. I want to be with it. So in a sense, today it appears that we would rather be God than be creatures of God. That we want to be the powerful thing rather than to be an instrument of power. We want to be creators rather than to be a part of a creative process. And this is where we sometimes tend to lose the thread in the how-to book or in the kind of metaphysics that deals pretty much in a mental origin, which doesn't relate it up to the depth of man. We all have a noble destiny as spiritual beings. But sometimes we tend to act as if we would gladly change this great glory of our noble destiny for mink and sex and the gross national product, which in a sense is a very real example of selling our soul for a mess of pottage. So you see, with this exterior orientation, we tend to think of love as something that comes along like the next raise in salary. You know, it's something that happens. When the right person comes, you're loved. It is primarily a matter of being loved rather than loving, rather than the capacity to love. So then if we think about love at all, it so often is in the terms of how to be loved, how to be lovable. In the pursuit of this, you see, we seek to be successful and powerful because, after all, that makes us more attractive. Man always feels that the best way to be attractive is to have more money, have a better job, be able to dress better, drive better cars. And the whole appeal is on this basis, that it makes you more attractive. And basically, though I'm sure the women's lib people change this a little bit and should, basically it has been traditionally the role of the woman to feel that the way to be more attractive, of course, is to be more glamorous and to keep her body slim and trim and to wear the right makeup and so forth. So what most persons in our culture mean by being lovable is being popular and having sex appeal. So then we tend, you see, to completely depreciate and undermine what love really is. Now, there's an interesting little segment that I took out of, should have say stolen out of R.D. Laing's interesting book, Knots, K-N-O-T-S. It's interesting. Some of you may have seen it. He's a psychiatrist. And he has written a very poetic thing that reads in a very interesting poetic style. And I think it's so interesting that one of our people is thinking of working it into a dramatic thing, which I think will be very, very exciting. But he deals with some of the deeper problems that go on in the consciousness of man and does it in a rather delightful way. And here's one that I think is apropos here. It goes like this. Jill wants Jack to want her. Jack wants Jill to want him. To get him to want her, she pretends that she wants him. To get her to want him, he pretends to want her. Jack wants Jill's want of Jack. So Jack tells Jill Jack wants Jill. Jill wants Jack's want of Jill, so Jill tells Jack Jill wants Jack. Which, as he says, is a pretty perfect contract. Jill and Jack both want to be wanted. Jill wants Jack because he wants to be wanted. Jack wants Jill because she wants to be wanted. Jill wants Jack to want Jill to want Jack's want of her want, or his want of her want, of Jack's want that Jill's want Jack to want Jill to want Jack's want of her want, or his want of her to want Jack to want. Then at the bottom he goes on and he says, repeat this continuously. And it goes on and on. It's a round, you see. And it's very real. You know, you read this and you think it over, and it's true. Little reason, little wonder that there's so much confusion in love relationships. Why people have to continuously, you do love me, don't you? Well, of course I love you. There's this constant protestation of love. But what is love? What do we mean by love? German poet, philosopher von Goethe says, if the eye were not of a sunny nature, how could it see the sun? If God's own power did not exist with us, how could the godlike delight us? If we were not made in and of love, how could we have a yearning for love? The last line was my addition, not Goethe. If we were not made in and of love, how could we have a yearning for love? How could man have a hunger for love if love were not his own nature? He could never know what it is. Why would he yearn for it if it were not already a part of him? If you have a feeling of love for someone, no matter on what degree that love may be, if there's something of a feeling of love for another, it is because to that degree you have felt a sense of love in you. And in a sense, the love that you feel for him and the love that you seem to give to him is love that is coming through you. In other words, you have loved him through loving yourself. And that's the only way you can ever give love. There is no other way. There's no other way to express love except through self-love. If I say, I love you, all I'm really saying is, if I'm sincere, we'll give me that credit that I'm sincere, that I really feel that love for you, it is because I have become conscious of the depth of me to the degree that I can feel this love of my nature. And this love of my nature has flowed through me to the degree that I love myself. And thereby, in that self-love, I project the consciousness of that love to you. And even so, I can't give it to you. There's no possible way I can get love out of my heart and put it in your heart. There's no possible way you can give love from your heart to my heart. It can't be done. What is love? Is it something that you can buy and sell? Is it a commodity? There are people that think it is. And it's often presented this way. I fell in love. Now I have this great bundle of love that just suddenly happened. Cupid, he sent an arrow into my heart, and now I have love. Where did it come from? What is it? Now I have a lot of love to give you. I can't give you anything in terms of love. All I can do is express this consciousness, which is basically a self-love that looks at you in a whole way. And that's a very relative sense. And the only thing that can happen to you is that I have provided you with a kind of environment that is similar to sunlight to a seed. In And the sunlight provides a very warming influence. And in that atmosphere, the seed breaks its shell and opens. And what happens to it has happened from the inside out. The sun didn't put the blossom in the seed. The sun provided an environment in which the seed was free to open. So when I express my love, which has come out of a self-love, and it has to be, even though some people shy away from this, I have to love me or I can't love. And that love that is coming out of a self-love provides an environment in which you feel comfortable, hopefully. And in that feeling of relaxation and peace as a result of that environment, you let down your barriers, your frustrations, and you let something of that innateness of love express through you. And this is what happens when two people love each other. Neither one has given the other one anything. We try so hard. We exchange cards, we hold hands, we do all these things outwardly to somehow try to demonstrate and prove our love, but you cannot give or exchange love. You can only try to demonstrate it. But the love, if there is love at all, the love which does not alter when it alteration finds, to use Shakespeare's words, is a love that simply is a radiance that causes the other person to let down his guard, his resistance, his fear of people, his tendency to hide his love under a bushel basket, and to let it radiate. And so then he loves himself. Two people loving themselves is what we call two people loving each other. And unless that happens, then their loving each other is artificial, it's insincere, and it can't work. This is turning the whole process around. But it helps us to know that our capacity to love is directly dependent upon our ability to love ourselves with a mature self-love. Charles Fillmore says, love is not the plaything of human volition, but the action of divine law. It is not the plaything of human volition. Not something I can just play with and I turn it on as I want. But it's the action of the divine law. And I simply let the law work. I step into its field, and it becomes a manifest reality. Love then becomes a tremendous energy within that must flow through us. And to flow through us, it has to love us. And be love in us. This is why Jesus would say, when asked to sum up the law, what is the great law? He said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second commandment is, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And that's the key to the whole thing. Without that aspect, that final, which was not just something added on, just to make it look good, that's the key to it all. You can't love your neighbor and you can't love God unless you love yourself. You may want to love God. Much of the protestation of love for God, oh, I love God so much. I can't stand me, you see, indicates that I want to love God. I can see the value of loving God. And I've been taught from the time I was young that I must love God. And so I love God. But you can only love God, you can only love anyone or anything to the degree that you love yourself. So you always have a pretty good slide rule. How do you think of you? It's a good way to test your love for another person. When you say, I love this person, this is the greatest, oh, she's a dream walking, and he's the most handsome guy, and I'm so much in love, you actually feel a greater sense of self-esteem at that time than any other time. If you do, then it's pretty much an indication that you're feeling this process of love. Also, another thing, if love is the action of divine law, then there is no strain or drain upon love. And if you ever feel, I loved and loved and loved that person, and boy, I love till I'm exhausted, that may have been a lot of things, but it wasn't love. And quite often parents tell this to children, you see. Or parents, sometimes a wife tells it to her husband, I've been loving you through thick and thin, and I'm just tired of it, you see. Well, of course, she hasn't really loved at all. There's no strain or drain on love. Love is an inexhaustible energy source that flows from within and knows no limit and is invigorating in the process. So that if you love one person, you can love all humanity. And there's no greater strain on you to love everybody than there is to love one. That is, if it's real love. And that, again, is an interesting slide rule. Now, whenever a person is involved in a relationship where his love is seemingly ineffective, or even seemingly rebuffed, then it is basically that to a certain degree, this person does not love or respect himself. Because love has great power. If I can love enough, in terms of this spiritual energy force that comes out of the innateness within me, if I can love enough, and love enough in the sense that I will not be limited or inhibited by the appearance, that I will not say, well, this guy is a real bum, but I'm going to love him anyway and try to dissolve it, you see, because then I've negated the whole thing. But I'm going to go within myself and realize my oneness with love, and I'm going to go forth with the consciousness I salute the divinity within you. And if I can love to that degree, that love is going to have an influence. It can't help it. It's like the sunlight. A seed can't contain itself if it's sitting out in the sun. The sun's got to do its work. It responds, and love has that kind of an influence, you see. So that if you're trying to love someone, maybe an unruly child, it may be a husband, it may be a boss or an employer and so forth, and you've been told if you just love them, everything will work out. If you're loving that person and you're getting no response at all, if you're really a sincere and honest student of truth, then you must look within yourself and say that somehow it is because I do not love and respect myself enough. Sometimes I'm trying to love somebody else into being something that I wish I could be, but really feel I'm not. We've got to face up to that, you see, because love must, first of all, begin as a self-love. You can never love anybody else more than you love yourself. You can't do it. Can there be more electricity come into the incandescent bulb to give off light than is flowing through the wire? No, can't be. Hopefully, what flows through the wire is going to wind up in the bulb. There may be some resistance along the way, and a good bit of it is lost in resistance. But you're not going to get any more power out of the bulb than is flowing through the wire. No possibility that you can love anybody more than you love yourself. The problem is, most of us have grown up in a background that goes way back into history, back into the religious roots that were very stern and dictatorial, where a person was supposed to be a miserable sinner unfit to darken the sight of God. He was supposed to accept the piety of self-subjection and so forth. He was supposed to debase himself. Therefore, any thought of self-love was ridiculous. You know, the old idea of humility and meekness was to be a spineless sort of a person before anybody. Any kind of pride was considered to be avarice. Any kind of self-esteem was supposed to be a great sin. And that's been one of the blights upon the religious stream through the history, you see. But in the freedom which we have in our modern day, freedom that has come about, first of all, because of the change in the mores and standards of our society, when people in olden times could withstand this kind of a consciousness and suppression, because after all, nobody had the ability to fall in love anyway in those days. Your marriages were picked for you. You didn't have anything to say about it. Your parents arranged them, or the government arranged them, or people put you together. If you fell in love, that was a bonus, but you were together anyway, you see. And this is the kind of lives that most of our forebears lived in, and people today in the world live under this kind of a society, you see. So that we have a freedom today, where you have freedom of choice, and you can select, and you can love whom you want to love. But the unfortunate part is, while we now have the freedom which is more legal than real, we still haven't outgrown this sense of self-subjection. This idea of what a horrible thing it is to talk about loving yourself. Well, that's terrible. Who's going to love? This guy loves himself enough already. You know, he's an egotist. The interesting thing is, the man who you call an egotist, and the bluff and the boaster and the braggart, is a person who has a terrible self-esteem. And he's outward trying to cover up his own inward lack. This has always been true. You know, they say the loud laugh that speaks the vacant mind. The loud outward expression that shows emptiness within the self. The person who, or in another sense, the Don Juan, the great lover, who's out conquering damsels everywhere, who actually has a total emptiness of love, has no love whatever, and a total disrespect of himself. That's the strange thing. We've been suckers to this kind of a thing. In the scenarios and the plays and the fictions that we've read, this has been played up a good deal, and it's been overplayed, you see, because this is not love. It's the quest for love, and the hopeless quest for love, because there's no hope of finding it out there. The only hope is finding it within oneself. Meister Eckhart, one of my favorite people, says if you love yourself, you love everybody else as you do yourself. As long as you love another person less than you love yourself, you will not really succeed in loving yourself. But if you love all alike, including yourself, you will love them as one person, and that person is both God and man. Thus, he is a great and righteous person who, loving himself, loves all others equally. You see, when we love ourselves, we are secure in ourselves, and then we can face the changes of the world without threat. If we do not love ourselves, then we're dependent to a large extent for our security on whether someone outside loves us, or praises us, or is nice to us, and says nice things and does nice things and sends Hallmark cards. So every change in people and every changing situation to a person who does not have this self-esteem is a threat and pushes his buttons of hate and resistance. And this is a hard one. If you think you love someone and you are terribly hurt by something he does, or some inattention, or some unkindness, you do not thus evidence how unlovable he is, but you simply evidence the fact that you do not love as you think you love. Because there can be no hurt in love. Hurt is an evidence of the cover-up of love, the protestation of love, the insistence that I love, which may well be the I want to love. I believe that love is right. I want to be loved, and this person loves me, so therefore I love him, as long as he loves me. And that's where love is in so many instances. I have this great hunger and desire for love, and if somebody gives me attention, I fall in love with him. I think. But if, therefore, as a result, I find hurt in this relationship, then it evidences the fact that I do not really love. Obviously, this is giving a new definition to love. It's isolating love as being this spiritual force that emanates from out of the individual, which is an inward-out thing, not an exterior thing, not an emotional thing. It may use the emotions as a conduit through which it expresses, but it's not emotional. It doesn't begin within you, in your own heart, in your own feelings, in your own sense of obligation, which is, by and large, what the term falling in love actually means. Because it is a falling emotionally. It's a whole emotional experience. It may have little, if not anything, to do with love, real love. Many people fall in love, get married, love each other for a long period of time, and then suddenly discover the tremendous hurt that goes on within them and come to the realization that we don't really love. What happened? What happened? Love never happened. You see, it didn't happen. There was no real love. There was no real love. And that's startling. And so it's important that we begin to take a look at this thing called love, to know that most of us have love all bottled up within us. We have it all bottled up within us because we've been taught, first of all, that you should not give attention to yourself. Shouldn't be egotistical. Shouldn't love yourself. So then everybody has this desire for love. It's a compulsion. I want love. I want to be loved, and everywhere you go, I want to be loved. Won't you love me? Won't you love me? Anybody, please, somebody love me. Anybody. So the first person that loves me, I go gaga, you see. Because I have this need, this want to be loved. And the thing that we do not know, because it hasn't been taught, because we've been misled by psychology, actually, is that the only way you can be loved is to love yourself. See, we've been told that the greatest need of man is to be loved. That's the theme that's run as a constantly recurring theme through all psychological things. Though many of the people in the new psychology field are changing this a little in the depth psychology. But for long, this is what it was. So the whole thing, the need of man is to be loved. I mean, out our head, yes. Everybody can agree with that. Of course I want to be loved. I feel it. I want to be loved. I want to be loved. And so we're looking for love. We want to be loved. But, you see, the statement is wrong. It's right as far as it goes, but it's wrong because it doesn't go far enough. And that's a little trick that so often happens in things. It's wrong because it's taken out of context. It doesn't deal with the whole thing. Certainly it's true that the greatest need of man is to be loved. But the only way he can be loved is from within himself. So then, in essence, it is more correct to say the greatest need of man is not to be loved. The greatest need is to love. To love. And if you begin with the idea that my need is to love, and love is my very nature, and the depth of me is just bubbling over with love, that's why I hunger for love, because I know that this love is my nature. Therefore, I do not need to have someone to love in order to love. That may be a kind of confusing statement, but it's important, because unless we get this point, we really miss the test in terms of what love is. You don't have to have someone to love in order to love. That's why Dostoevsky in Brothers Karamazov goes into ecstatic flow of words and saying, love everybody, love all the creatures, love the birds, the air, the trees, love life, love everything. You see, he's saying just love. Don't worry about loving this person. Love. Stir up this flow and let love begin to flow. And when you do, when you're in this consciousness of loving, then love becomes the vibration that you send out, which is a tremendous attracting force. And you become lovable. But you're lovable not in a superficial way, not in the kind of facade you have on. You're lovable because you are radiating this consciousness of love, and you will attract love to you, and loving people, and loving responses. And people who are hateful to everybody else will be loving to you, because you are expressing that consciousness of love. This is what love is, you see, and this is what every man needs. The interesting thing is the kind of experiences that happen to people sometime, and I'm already over. That's the experience that happened to me tonight. Well, I'll close with this anyway. The story is told of Bayard Rustin, who was in a elevator in a hotel in Spokane one time. And he was ordered by a white man, who obviously was a bigot, to lace up my shoes. Bayard Rustin, you see, who was a man who obviously was very mature, had a distinct self-esteem. Without any objection or argument, he knelt down and laced the man's shoes. And he stood up and didn't say anything, and the man reached in his pocket and took out some money and handed him a tip. Bayard Rustin, without any rancor in his voice, turned to him and said, "But you see, I didn't do that for money. I assumed you needed help." And of course, immediately then, the man wilted. He was put in his place without anybody criticizing him because he knew what had happened. You see? And so then he begged Bayard Rustin to come spend some time with him. And he spent a whole day talking about human relations and what goes on in people and so forth. But you see, the man actually had a sense of self-love. Had or has. Which proved the real man. The other man, of course, hated himself. This is always true. Behind every act of prejudice or every act of bigotry, there is a distinct self-hatred, you see. And if we know this, then why should we react and be hurt? I mean, if the guy wants to hate himself, fine, but why should I be upset? Like this statement that made a play on the American Tobacco Company, LSMFT. Low self-esteem means friction and trouble. Anytime a person has a low self-esteem, he's going to have sparks everywhere. And he'll blame other people for it. So the point is, though we all have this desire to be loved, the only way we can be loved is to turn within ourselves and to meditate often on the consciousness of love as the heart and root and center of our being. To know that not only does God love us with an everlasting love, but God is love, and we are created in the image likeness of God, so we're created in and of love, and love is our very nature. Every single one of you has enough love to love the whole world. You may say you're trying to stir up enough love to be able to love that person around you that's so hateful. But you have enough love to love everybody. That's the beauty of love. What you're trying to do is to stir up a lot of this confused animosity you have so that you can tolerate this person, but you're not really trying to love him. Because when you love him, you don't try to make him over, you don't try to make him stop hurting, you don't try in any way to condemn him or criticize him. You simply love yourself in his presence. And let that love flow forth as an energy. It's a protecting presence. It's an attracting force. It's a healing influence. It's a prospering power. And we'll probably deal with some of those things as the weeks go by. So I hope that you will let this little incitement tonight, excitement, incite you into some new activity and some new deeper thought. Maybe we've turned the whole ball of wax upside down. Maybe now you can't even figure out what love is. I hope so. I hope you're more confused than when you came. Perhaps as the weeks go by, we'll unravel some of it. But there's no possible way in which we consider the power and practice of love in a very deep spiritual way, unless we're willing to take another look at this thing called love and not just hide behind this repository of insincerity with, oh, I love you, dear, you know. And behind which we're saying, I sure can't stand the dress she wears, though, you know, and this sort of thing. So there's a great deal to deal with and a great deal to think about, and I hope that you'll work with it. All right. So, all right. As we go on our way tonight, I have a little treatment I'd like to give to you, just a suggested one that we want to kind of implant into your consciousness. So get still for just a moment, if you will. Let these words actually touch something of the real depth within you. You are established in spiritual unity with the infinite love of God. And you are a radiant channel for its expression. Creative love, transcendental love, flows through you, loving you, and making you sensitively warm and loving to everyone whose life touches yours. You are a dynamic center of love, this moment and every moment of every day. You are mighty to attract great good to you, and to radiate great good to others. You are established in spiritual unity, in oneness with the infinite love of God. You are loved. You are loving. And you are set free through this love. And we bless you in this consciousness. Amen.